Hey everyone, it's RJ Conti here and my husband Brad, and we are here to do this live reading of the first 3 chapters of my book, and Brad is going to be reading Ash's parts. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I caught a cold earlier this week after I'd already set up this live reading, so my voice kind of sounds like the male parts, you know. So as long as you don't mind a froggy author, I'm going to attempt this anyway because I like to fulfill my commitments to you guys. So I will be drinking tea provided by the beautiful RJ Metcalf, who is a dear friend of mine, and not just because we both share the name RJ, but because she's a talented writer and a dear friend. She sent me a whole bunch of tea along with the copy of her book that I won and some giveaway type prizes and things from a Facebook party of hers. So check out RJ Metcalf stuff. She likes tea. Also, those of you from my... Oh, hey, Perry. Those of you from my Myers-Briggs group. Hey, Aaliyah. I recognize her profile picture. My Myers-Briggs group, I also invited you to see an INTP and an ESFJ in action, too. They're just here for the personality types, no. We are as different as night and day, but one thing that we both love is a good story. We watch anime together. That's kind of the Venn diagram crossing of our interests. I am more into the K-dramas, and he likes more of the slice of life and also action. And anime kind of meets that middle ground. So anyway, a lot of my books and stories I think are inspired by Asian storytelling styles and The End of the Dream for sure. And I will not tell you which animes inspired it because I feel like that would be a spoiler. But anyway, Brad, while we are waiting for people to arrive, why don't you answer one of the questions that was left for you? So Tracy Ann and Bethany Jennings both asked a very similar question, so I think I'm just going to combine it and say they wanted to know, how do you support me in my work and my writing with kids, with food? Tracy asked. Bethany asked, how do you think you help RJ best when it comes to her writing? What would you guys, or what would you say to them?
Do I help?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking. Let's see. Probably,
Cute male inspiration, because he's very handsome.
yeah, I'm actually the, I'm always the male model for covers. I just wear makeup. That's probably letting you, or going over the audio reading of your, or the verbal reading of your, like, first drafts. Going over that, giving you a chance to verbalize what you've written, see how it sounds, and gives you a chance to hear it out loud, and gives me a chance to provide feedback on, like, the first draft.
Yes, so I always read absolutely everything I write out loud to Brad, because hearing it out loud helps me make edits, and it means that we can, like, engage in the story together, so I get to see all of his reactions, and then as I read out loud, he makes critiques too, and especially on my male characters. He helps make them more male and more realistic, so that's always a humongous help to me. It takes a lot of time to read everything out loud. I tend to read chapter by chapter as I go, so he always hears the first draft, the rough draft. So actually, you may not know how great my stuff is after it's been through a bunch of you wonderful editors. But yeah, I'm thankful for the editors, and he actually helps contribute a lot of good critiques. So yeah, that's a fun thing. Not a lot of husbands do that kind of stuff for their wives, and it takes up a lot of his evenings, but I am so appreciative. All right. I think I'll save the last questions for later. And before my voice fully gives out, just go ahead and jump on in. And Brad is going to be reading my male parts. So he's going to be reading the dad and Ash, my wonderful Ash. You've seen Ash's face come across in a lot of my Instagram and posts on this author page. Ash is my half-Thai guy. And yeah. Oh, Yasha asks, that's a big time commitment. How does he fit in? Well, Yasha, I actually don't write. I have not written a ton since having my third child. Definitely, probably before that. Hi, Yasha. And so it's not like I'm putting out a book every 3 months. I'm probably at this point putting out one twice a year. So really, we probably only do like an evening where I read out loud to him maybe once a month on average. So it doesn't actually end up taking up a lot of time, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, it's, I mean, there are definitely phases where you're in the writing mode more than others, so I don't know how to compute the average across a year, but yeah, there are just times where I play fewer video games, or we
what a hard trade-off. Okay, here we go. See how my voice goes. And I included the pre-order link in the description on this video so that if you get interested by the end of the 3 chapters, you know where you can grab it. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Chapter 1. He stood at the top of 2 large rocks by the river, his back to me stretched straight and slim, his stance wide, hair flipping freely in the slight breeze. The soft bubbling over the expanse of boulders lay at his feet. Something made my heart rate speed up, and I first thought it was fear. Why was he alone staring at the river like that? Was he contemplating something drastic? But his gaze tilted up into the sky, his head held high and his shoulders broad. He couldn't be suicidal. Maybe he was praying. I went to church and called myself a Christian, but public charismatic displays of prayer like this were not my thing. I watched him unmoving, breathing slowed, eyes fixed, even though I crept closer. How long would he stand there? At first he appeared ageless to me in the reflection of the piercing sun on the glittering water. "Vivian!" My stepmother's voice broke the spell. As if she had yelled an animal mating call in the middle of the library, I cringed and whirled to find her and quiet her with a death glare. She was too far back down the rocky river trail, her head lowered, gaze scanning every step she took before she made it. She didn't move as deftly as I did around the great outdoors that was our backyard here in Index, Washington. In the half second it took me to spin back around, the guy was staring at me, and I realized he was a teen like myself. His body had rotated to face me, arms lowered, shoulders square. Self-assurance radiated off his chest like the sunbeams hitting the left side of his face. Brow furrowed, he gave me a look that seemed more curious than irritated at my intrusion. He stared openly, giving me pointed eye contact as if he were a fearless, all-knowing being, his eyes deep brown orbs. I gawked helplessly back at him, fumbling with my shirt hem, feeling a bit like a peeping Tom. "Hi, sorry," I muttered. "I live around the corner. I was just hiking the river." Why bother explaining? He waited silently, shifting to watch Navira approach. His black-lashed eyes and short, wavy dark hair said part Asian to me, but he was also tall and fair. He wore jeans with torn cuffs and a hole in the knee. On me, they would have made me look like an impoverished urchin. On him, they looked purposely hip. A caramel-colored corduroy dress jacket covered a white t-shirt with a low V-neck, and black Converse shoes completed his look. He had a stud in one ear, and the sun glistened off it every time he moved. When he said nothing more, I floundered. "I'm sorry to bother you." He turned his head back to me.
"I'm Ash."
His voice was as strong as his posture. My stepmom was going to be there any minute, and then my part of the conversation would end. Navira, Lord Lover, still subconsciously treated me like a child who would open her mouth and spit out something horrific. Navira clearly found it safer to speak for me in company, or no one had told her she was an airwaves hog. "I'm Vivian Lark," I murmured before Navira trudged up, sweat soaking her blonde hair. We had hardly walked a half mile. I couldn't believe she was already this tired. The weekly treks had been her idea. Navira had watched me slip outdoors for long hikes often this year and had assumed her stepdaughter was retreating from her. She obviously thought it was a way to bond. I seriously disliked sharing my me time. She was probably regretting her decision now. Navira swiped the back of a hand against a gaudy sweatband that clung to her forehead. She leaned over, hands on her knees, and took a deep breath. Reaching into her backpack, the thing must have weighed 20 pounds and was seriously overkill. She pulled out a gigantic brand-name water bottle and guzzled from it. Embarrassed, I poked her in her sweaty side. "This is Ash. Just met him," I whispered. Navira held up a hand to Ash. "Catching my breath," she panted. I was more mortified by the second, but could come up with nothing new to say. "Ash, do you live around here?" Navira finally choked out, blowing wisps of loose, bleached strands from her face. "This is my stepmother," I added, still grasping for words, hoping he hadn't for a second assumed we were actually related.
"Hey,
he replied simply, ignoring Navira's question. Navira steadied her aching sides with a hand on her waist. She pointed the other one in the direction we came. We live like a block down that way. Our backyard has the white picket fence that opens up right on the river. I elbowed her. She flashed me a puzzled frown. You don't have to tell a strange teenage guy where we live, I mouthed. Navira, ever the friendly one, ever the clueless, helpless blonde, as my dad liked to say. I knew for a fact that opposites attracted, because my new stepmother was as ditzy as my father was smart. He seemed to love her for it, but she kept my blushing muscles working. Navira smiled apologetically at Ash. You're probably here for some fresh air and solitude, and we've interrupted your time with our asthmatic wheezing. Speak for yourself, I muttered, this time loud enough that I hoped Ash would hear. He probably thought we were hippie tree huggers, overly friendly and nosy as all get out. Feeling my neck get hot, I took a step away, more than ready to put Ash behind me and move on. Ash's shoulders suddenly lost some of their tension, deflating under his fashionable corduroy jacket. He shrugged.
I come here often. I'll probably see you around.
I allowed a polite, nervous smile and a quick bend of my wrist in his direction. Navira laid a heavy hand on my shoulder for support. Sighing, I trudged forward, leading her over the last slippery path. For some reason, I was angry, thinking of the handsome, serious Ash, seeing me with Navira and thinking she was family. Hey, Caitlin, thanks for tuning in. Wanted to say hi. All right, chapter 2. You're not going again, Dad, I whispered. The stiff, smooth leather of his briefcase handle in my hands felt like as much of an enemy as ever. I pinched it hard between my fingertips, willing it to crack and break. It was rare when I vocalized my wishes, and Dad had long stopped listening to them. He buttoned his sleeves, shirt starched and spotless, tie pin gleaming at me like a goading, winking eye. I used to love the smell of leather and shoe polish. I used to think the aroma belonged to my father alone. I was told I played with the tassels on his shiny black Oxfords before I even took my first steps, my drool clouding the perfect mirror-like surfaces of the shoes. I still kept his first red leather briefcase, hidden in the back of my closet, as if pretending I didn't still love it with all my heart. When the handle had cracked, my father donated it to my dress-up collection, and I had played daddy businessman for weeks, shuffling precariously in those shoes of his. I slung one of his ties around my neck loosely, and the end flapped against my knees. Mom had taken pictures. That was before she left us. I was told she'd said he was obsessed with his career, that he loved new business ventures more than he did anything or anyone else, and that I, his daughter, was such a daddy's girl that I would end up just like him, that we were all nothing but demanding on her, that she was losing herself. I had been a bad 3-year-old. That was my only memory of her, telling me I was bad. I didn't understand what I had done, and I still couldn't fathom what was muddling the emotions boiling over in her brain that day. I only knew one thing. I wasn't worth raising. My mom had made that abundantly clear when she left us for good, not giving even an inkling of where she was going. The wind blew through a back window to shut the front door hard after her. I remember that, too. But my father proved I wasn't worthwhile as well, every year after, when he chose to travel month in and month out for his job. Every time he prepared to go, I tried to crack the handle on his briefcase. When I was 5 years old, I was convinced that the world would run out of leather luggage if I could destroy enough, and my father would be forced to stay with me. Most of the time, I resorted to scissors when he wasn't looking. By the time I hit high school in my teens, Dad was convinced I needed a woman's hand. For the most part, we'd stopped really communicating, and I, completely unaware of how to repair that, satisfied myself with longing looks at his back every time the roller suitcase emerged from its too brief nap in the master closet. At some point, I learned that defaming his personal belongings would never have stopped him in the slightest. Our 4,000-square-foot house, right on the Skycomish River with its wraparound porch and manicured arboretum-like garden, was proof of that. Dad had enough money to buy a luggage store if need be, but it didn't stop me. It ate me up, the shameful maliciousness of it, but I continued. Navira came into our life after my 14th year. For the most part, she was benign. She tried to keep house and cook that first month before caving to Dad's pleas that she hire a maid and chef. After that, she became the trophy wife she was supposed to be. Only 13 years my senior, she put on a motherly air that made her seem as silly as a peacock without tail feathers. She accompanied Dad on some of his business trips and stayed home pretending to be mom to me the other half of the time. I put up with her whims, mostly because I wasn't one to vocalize my complaints, and partially because I truly thought that, if I were completely alone any longer, I would go mad. Most of my childhood had been survived hiding in my room reading books and drawing and designing shoes, vainly trying to tune out the sounds of Spanish soap operas below. My previous nanny spoke not a word of English, and the TV had been her soulmate. The best part of getting a stepmother was that Lolita and her romantic dramas had been dismissed for good.
This will be the last trip of the quarter, Viv.
Dad attempted to comfort me, checking his tie in the gleaming reflection of the oven. Everything shone in the monstrosity of a house I called home. Sometimes I hiked outdoors just to remember what dirt looked like. I don't believe you. You always lie, I thought. I murmured, squeezing the leather handle in half until my palms started to sweat. It had been a long time since I'd cracked a briefcase handle. At least I'd stopped using scissors. Yet the physical attempt of it, the destruction, was my passive-aggressive tradition, and I vowed to keep it up until I walked out of that home for good. Maybe my father will miss me when I leave him like Mother did. The thought strangled me, and I had to smother a sudden wash of tears. For the first time that year, Dad was paying attention.
Choking up now that your old man is going? It's just like any other time, Viv.
Dad's slick-dyed honey hair betrayed no gray. Maybe he thought the moniker old man sounded cute and homey. I'm so not choking up, I muttered. Oh, 16-year-old girls are moody like that. Navira bustled into the kitchen with all the awkwardness of an out-of-control spinning top. Her lipstick in one hand, she kissed my dad goodbye and then rubbed at the smear on his mouth. Sorry, handsome. Looking over her shoulder at me, Navira adopted what she probably assumed was a careful and concerned motherly frown. Vivian is really sullen these days, I think, and isolated. Too alone for her age. I'm worried about her. Dad gave me all of a millisecond glance, but turned a brief scowl on Navira.
Don't talk like that. What if the help heard?
I was probably crazy, and it hurt his image. Shame washed over me again. Dad turned back on the fake smile.
Watch some TV or order a pizza, Viv. Take some time to have fun. Finals aren't for a while yet. Relax.
Relax. It was Dad's favorite word. Navira and I were to be like paintings on his wall in his home, relaxing, doing nothing. Why didn't he ever take his own advice? I've got to get to school.
No hug?
Dad smoothed out the crease in his briefcase handle after he picked it up off the bar stool where I'd been abusing it. Neither of us had ever acknowledged the ongoing feud between his briefcase and me. Maybe he thought I'd need to be on meds if we acknowledged I had an addiction to destroying leather. Even though my whole body wanted to ignore his hug and trudge out of the house, a sudden tightening of my throat reminded me of my deepest fear, that one day Dad wouldn't come back either. This might be my last hug, and I should treasure it and never refuse it. I couldn't remember what it was like to hug my mom. Hugging Navira felt like pressing a sack of rocks against yourself. Her overly enhanced E-cup bosom was anything but comfortable. Still, that was another good thing about gaining a stepmother. There was less chance Dad would leave both of us, not with the googly-eyed gazes he still gave his second bride. There was a vicarious security in those gag-worthy looks. As I hugged him, the fabric of the lapels smothered my cheek, the scent of the downtown dry cleaner assaulting my nose. Then there it was, shy at first and finally in my head at full volume, Dad's musky cologne. I inhaled and held my breath. Please don't let this be the last time I see you, I thought. Please be safe. I'm going to take a second before Chapter 3 to say hi to Lorianne and Bethany and to sip my tea. Those of you who weren't here in the beginning, I have a cold, so I am making do for this live reading. Big applause to Brad.
Now that Lorianne's here, should we start over from the beginning?
Oh, Lorianne! She would just love that, huh? Okay, Chapter 3. 1 week remained clenched in my junior year's tight-knuckled fist. All that barred me from summer vacation were the gaping mouths of finals, ready to swallow me whole. I can make it. Inwardly cheering myself on, I walked out the school gates with a regular flow of high schoolers heading home for the day. Lagging behind the group going in the opposite direction of my house, I dragged my feet against the cement of the sidewalk. Maybe stopping and getting an ice cream to go would make studying more appealing. At this point, it felt like feeding myself piece by piece to a group of hungry crocodiles. A bike whizzed down the paved street. I looked up, absently curious, and recognized the rider, Ash from the river. Noticing me an instant before he passed, he locked eyes with me and winked. My heart rose up in my throat. There was no denying that he was gorgeous and a little exotic. Like you. He was also a brand new face. I was positive he didn't attend my school. I was probably the least popular girl in school. They had nicknamed me the rich bitch. How poetic, after Dad had given me commemorative company coins to pass out to my friends on my birthday back in 9th grade. Not wanting to hurt Dad's feelings, but embarrassed by the idea, I had simply arrived early and left them on everyone's desks, like solitary alien eyes twinkling up at them. The comments had been insulting, as I expected, and very soon someone traced the bizarre gifts back to me. It hadn't taken them too long. Dad's company name was on the back. It was obvious I was handing out expensive leftovers from a work party. It didn't win me any friends, and unfortunately helped brand me for my next couple of high school years. Forcing myself not to look backwards at Ash riding away, I focused on putting one step in front of the other as I trudged forward, fiddling with my backpack straps. My town boasted one old-fashioned ice cream parlor kitty corner to the school. Many high school sweethearts congregated after school and ate at Cheryl's. Brief background info. My mom's name is Cheryl, and she always supports my writing. Right now she is flying home from Israel, so she can't be here for this live video, but she reads every chapter as soon as I write it, like on email, and is so excited. So I had to name the ice cream parlor after her. Good. I'm glad somebody's laughing, Yasha. We should all be laughing. It was quaint with pinstripe green walls, white and chrome bar stools, and photographs of Paris. The owner liked kids and gave out free scoops once in a while. I lived in the tiny city of Index, Washington, population 199, out in the middle of nowhere. And by the way, guys, Index really exists out near me. There are pictures of it on my author page, and I have a friend out there, and I go visit her like twice a year, and I love it. It's beautiful. Back to the story. The surrounding area was smothered in ancient trees, craggy mountain peaks that were always a delicious shade of purple, and muddy roads. In town, everything was quaint and small. At the end of my street, a general store, the size of my living room, sat like a friendly nod to Little House on the Prairie. No one was a stranger here. Dad had moved out here to raise his child away from the busy city with fresh air and nature. Except for his daily run, he still chose to spend his time under the LED streetlights of Seattle over our country air and nature. I wish he had heeded his own advice. Ash felt like a foreign object in a microscope slide of boring, normal cells. There was no possibility that he had moved to the area. I knew every house that was for sale in town, a grand total of 1, and no one had bought the Aspen's rundown, unkempt antique yet. Another bit of background info. We had a landlord company in our last house named Aspen, and they were the Pits. So that's a little burn. Because we authors have to do that, right? Cheryl's was full, but not packed tight. The saccharine smell of cold delight caressing my nose. I stood in line, swaying back and forth on my tiptoes to see the ice cream choices. I knew I'd probably just choose butter pecan again, but there was always the possibility Bravery would actually visit me, and I'd venture out of my norm and do something new. Yeah, so it was a relatively slim chance, but it existed. After ordering a double scoop of butter pecan in a cup, and promising myself I'd be adventurous another day, I reached into my backpack for my wallet. A hand shot up behind me with a wad of cash and laid it on the counter in front of me. That was nice, the owner, manning the register, smiled. I spun to see Ash, standing so close I couldn't move my arm without touching him, so I didn't move. He wasn't terribly tall, but his chin could have rested on my short head. He grinned with one corner of his mouth. Oh, like that. Standing his ground in front of me and not even politely retreating a step. He didn't touch me, but was close enough that I knew he must hear my rapid pulse. I gaped at him, unsure of what to say. Thanks, I ducked my head, furious in my embarrassment. Waiting a second or two too long, Ash finally stepped aside and pointed back at the counter. My ice cream was waiting for me to begin breathing again and take it. It was so rare that a guy wanted anything to do with me besides get my phone number, something I was deathly afraid to give out. I didn't drive yet, and I didn't have a cell phone. I was pretty sure Navira had deemed both unsafe for minors or something. I assumed she just wanted to keep me close to home so she could play mother longer. Either that or Dad had confided in her about the suitcases, and they both decided I was emotionally unstable. But the idea of Dad telling his wife about my briefcase mauling tradition made my insides quake in anger, so I avoided that thought like a disease. I was also terrified of giving out my home phone and Navira picking up and blabbering everything that came across her mind to whichever male sat captive on the other end of the line, so I said no to the guys who inquired. After that happened a couple of times, I must have been labeled in the back alleys as a Christian prig. No one asked again. My knees were a little weak at the strange kindness, and I was in no hurry to leave. Waiting to see what Ash did next, I took a seat by the window, leaning my burning forehead on the cool, incandescent tile counter. Summer was almost upon us, and the weather betrayed its upcoming presence. My skin was damp from the short walk down from the school, and my head hummed with excitement. Ash sat down in an empty booth, holding a cone with something chocolate perched on top of it. He pulled out his smartphone and kept his head down, zoning in on the screen. I noticed he wore the same outfit that I had first seen him in. White t-shirt, camel jacket, and ripped jeans. Strands of his dark hair flopped down over his forehead and his head bent. He licked the ice cream every few seconds, clearing his perfect lips after every bite. I didn't realize I was gawking him until someone clattered down onto the stool next to me, obscuring my view. My cup of butter pecan sat forlorn and forgotten on the counter. I turned back to it and stirred it lazily, shoulders slumping. Tucking my black hair behind my ears, I forced a spoonful of cold sugar into my mouth, my taste buds numb. Familiar cold weight filled my chest. Even when someone reached out to me in kindness, I sat paralyzed with lonely dread, unable to respond. I was sick of myself. As if my feet had grown tired of my pathetic brain, I found myself standing, pushing back from the stool. The metal seat squeaked as it spun, and I recoiled, but my legs weren't finished with me. As my hand absently reached out for my bowl of ice cream, my feet started moving towards Ash's booth. While my chest clenched in panic, my legs didn't stop until I was sliding into the bench across from Ash and sitting right in front of him. The hard, sparkly plastic of the seat burned into the backs of my shorts, screaming at me to retreat. Horrified, I sat still, silently placing the cup in front of me and waiting, my eyes wide. The noise of the busy parlor masked my quickened breathing. Ash glanced up at me, his eyebrows cocked. He put the phone down on the table and licked his ice cream.
There you are. I thought you'd just sit across the room and stare at me until you burned a hole into me with your eyes. I'm glad you came to join me instead.
Heat flipped my stomach. I stared down at my cup. Sorry, I just never had anyone pay for me before like that. I wanted to thank you and not be so rude. Ash thrust his ice cream forward at me.
Want a taste?
It was my turn to raise my eyebrows. Of your ice cream? I squeaked. He smiled with both sides of his mouth this time.
Yeah, I'll trade you. I want to try your butter pecan, too.
All right, let's see your both sides of your mouth smile, my dear. Kind of. Was this a date now? Sharing germs with a strange guy? What if he was a psychopath?
I'm not a weird stalker, I promise.
He held up a palm as if reading my thoughts. I could feel my nose turning pink by this point, so I threw my face forward, closed my eyes, and clamped my mouth over the tip of his ice cream. That was totally anime style there. You know, have you ever seen the little anime girls like, oh! Anyway. I hated chocolate-flavored anything, but that was the furthest thing from my mind. I couldn't taste it anyway. My whole head burned. Ash was still smiling when I opened my eyes. He reached for my spoon and filled it with a generous scoop of my butter pecan. Slowly and almost reverently, he brought it to his lips. Closing his eyes as if in great pleasure, he swallowed it and then opened one eye to peek at me.
Is this how I'm supposed to do it? You have to shut your eyes to eat ice cream?
He was teasing me. I tittered and then cleared my throat. No, I murmured.
I'm sorry. I'm teasing you.
Are you reading my mind, too? He put more ice cream on my spoon and held it out to me, handle facing me. Cocking one eyebrow, he nodded at me to take it. Hands jittering nervously, I took the spoon from him, careful to make sure our fingers didn't touch. I then proceeded to shovel more ice cream into my mouth. Ash picked up his phone, sliding it into his inside jacket pocket. After another few licks, he dropped his chocolate ice cream onto a napkin lying on top of the table and grabbed another one out of the metal dispenser to use on his hands.
I visit the Skycomish River often, but this is my first time in Cheryl's.
I swallowed the ice cream that had been melting, forgotten on my tongue. Where are you from?
Gold Bar.
The closest town up the road from me. I couldn't imagine him being able to bike back home. It was non-stop uphill. That was impossible. Did you bike here?
Yeah.
Ash put his clasped hands on the table in front of him and gave me eye contact once more. I stared back down at my cup of melting butter pecan.
You live here in town, Vivian?
At first, hearing my name surprised me, but then I remembered I had introduced myself at the river. Yeah, we're over the bridge near the Whitewater Rapids shop at the end of that street. Recognition crossed over Ash's face, and he nodded.
Ah, the great big place.
Yep.
I've biked here all through the summer, after hiking and swimming the river.
He explained. We sat in silence for a minute. I stole a peek up at Ash, but he was still watching me, seemingly lost in thought. He seemed confident in his own skin, not shy and covertly wringing his hands like I was doing under the table. I forced myself to keep the conversation going. I'm a junior. Finals are this week.
Same. We finished last week.
I realized that Ash's smooth voice was rapidly putting me at ease. All just like yours, Bratty. What a smooth voice. Do you have friends you meet while you're here? I'm not in their spot, am I? I glanced around the parlor, hoping I wouldn't have to get up, or worse, share a booth with more strangers. Ash smirked and bit his lip, for the first time looking like a normal teenage guy.
Nah, I just moved here to Gold Bar. But if I did, I'd tell them to get lost. I'd rather be with the pretty raven-haired girl I bought ice cream for, of course.
The compliment came off his tongue so easily that I marveled. Raven? I giggled. Ash squinted one eye at me.
You have cool hair.
The nerves in my toes tingled and I couldn't speak. Ash closed his eyes for a long minute.
It reminds me of my mom's. Hers is jet black, too. She's originally from Thailand. She's beautiful, at least when her eyes aren't bloodshot and swollen from sleepless nights of drinking.
My brow furrowed. I was quiet, wishing he would stop speaking, but afraid to try to silence him. Why was he telling me this? Mothers. There wasn't a fouler subject in the world, according to me.
DUI.
Ash picked at his ice cream cone, tearing pastry under his fingers. His lean chest took a weary breath and his shoulders drooped.
One too many DUIs, actually. So wonder she didn't kill anyone in any one of her accidents. They tried to lock her up for 3 years. Or, they locked her up for 3 years.
My eyes as dry as sandpaper, my chest closed in on my heart like protective steel.
Sorry.
Ash straightened up and laughed.
Don't know how I got onto that. I don't do small talk well.
He ran a hand through his dark brown hair. I was supposed to comfort him, to say something polite and charitable, but I was silent. My body had gone cold. All mothers fail their children. It was something I'd steeled myself against ever caring about again. And that is the end of chapter 3. Hi, Terry. So we just finished all 3 chapters. If you would like to hear them and you weren't able to make it sooner, any of you, you can wait, and this will then completely upload and be available for viewing at any time. So now, before we stop, I thought we would ask Brad the rest of your questions. And if you've got any other questions for Brad, go ahead and send them now. All right, Brad. Bethany wants to know, what is your favorite of RJ's books?
Why do I have questions?
Why do you have questions? Because you're the popular guy. Everybody wants to know about you. They get way too many posts from me. They all hear about me all the time. I'm boring.
Oh, okay. So they already know everything about you. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Sorry. What was the question?
What is your favorite of RJ's books?
Oh, probably My Fault.
Yeah,
I like the, yeah. I like, it's funny, it's very funny. It has a character in it that, I consider very amusing. It's a style character. It matches my preferences pretty closely. I like it.
That's very kind. So, in My Fault, she is an ENTP, which is like the extroverted version of Brad, Korean Myers-Briggsers. And, so Brad, I was able to use some of his clever language, but also just amuse him, so we were able to laugh through it. It's my only comedy, though, so it's not really like my normal stuff. Thank you, Aaliyah. That's really kind. And thank you, Ruth. Yes, I did post this a long time ago. This book has been in the works for like 2 years. I just finished it 1.5 years, so some of you may have read it if you've been following my page for 2 years. All right. And then the last question for Bethany so far, give you guys a few more minutes to ask any if you want, is have you ever had a story idea of your own, and what was it about?
Wait, for me? Oh, of me, of course. Story idea of my own. I mean, as a kid, I had a few ideas.
Fort.
I tried.
I won't share that one.
What?
The fort.
I'm not sure that counts as an idea. But never really completed anything interesting. I can't say. I don't know. I like to when I hear stories, right? Read a book or watch TV. I do sometimes come up with sometimes the premise strikes me really, really well, and I will think of an alternate version of it that's significant enough to completely change the story, but still related to the original. I'll kind of run with that in my head a little bit. I'm sure most writers do that. But I've never actually followed through on it and done anything with it. But it's fun to sit and pontificate for a little while.
I'm not sure I knew that, Brad. That's neat. You should tell me them. Yeah, I love that. So those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, Brad and I met on Zanga.com, which was the little lesser-known cousin of MySpace, kind of in between the MySpace and Facebook era, because we are millennials. And Zanga was popular for a short while, and it was mostly blogging. It was not as big of a social media presence as MySpace or Facebook, but we met on there. And I had joined a Christian writers group, Christian authors, and Brad was friends with one of them. He is a computer guy, math and computer science, so he wasn't in part of our group, and he kind of like crashed in as this like bull in the china shop, so to speak, in our group. And so we met kind of through writing because we were bloggers, and Brad would just write comedy, like on his blog. He'd write funny things. His very first post was asking why women like scented soaps, and he wrote an entire discourse on how crazy it is. And then like his second one was a blonde joke, and I was like, hey, I'm blonde. And anyway, the rest was history. So Brad can write comedy. He is known in my family for being the most hilarious writer of cards. So birthday cards, Mother's Day, Father's Day. He has something new, fresh, and funny every single time. He writes like a huge amount in the card, and my family just looks forward to how funny it's going to be every time. Like at this point, he's got to keep one-upping himself. So he is hilarious. But not a lot of people know that. And I keep saying we should write like a comedy book together.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I feel like I have the problem of if I try to write something down, it is better as an informal thing. If I try to take an idea and like make it more formal, make it better, if it's like a blog post or maybe a document at work, the more I go over it, the more I tend to just iterate toward incredibly dry and well organized. And so I don't know that that making the occasional funny quip really turns well into writing comedy for me. But no, I haven't tried.
I bet a lot of authors totally understand that like it's almost fresher and better as a rough draft, and then the more you pick at it, the drier it gets. My fault was like that, trying to write an NTP's like an NTP with Asperger's, like conscious thought. I only had one editor, and I tried not to pick at it because, like, especially for her dialogue and her conscious thought, you kind of almost had to let it go. It is what it is. And so the editing was very light. Shout out to Desiree Williams for a great editing job, but we kind of picked at it lightly.
Tell that hi back. Thank you.
And yes, Ruth, you got to keep convincing us to do that. But yeah, I think that comedy is a special kind of process. So that makes sense. It makes sense.
Dave Barry was very heavily influential on my outlook on comedy. Dave Barry's writing style. And so my entire family has borrowed quite heavily from his works.
Yeah. And Scott Adams, too, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For those of you who didn't know, Scott Adams didn't just do Dilbert, but he had an ongoing blog, too, which was pretty funny. But anyway, any last comments or questions before we sign off and get back to our kiddos who are celebrating the fact that they're not going to bed, but that they are watching a movie?
Have you ever explained the real life, or what you observed in real life and how you turned it into the setting in the book? Like everything in the book is obviously based on the real life city, but there are a lot of details in there that are actually pulled from the city, from the store to the river to the. Have you ever talked about that? I
guess I really haven't. I mean, there was I should probably repost my album of index pictures because that would be a good idea. Dave Barry Scott Adams. Yes, Janine. Thank you. Here's another NTP. Thank you, Janine.
Yes, thank you. See, Dave Barry fans unite.
And hi, Sharon. We're just about to sign off, but thanks for joining us. Yeah, I can give a brief update. So, when I first moved to Washington from Texas, I left all of my family and came out to a state I had never even visited. And I got plugged in with Bible Study Fellowship. And there I met this beautiful soul. She's an ENFP like Ash. Her name is Kimberly Hansen, and she is probably going to bed now because she is a better person than I am. And she and I hit it off like bosom friends, right off the bat. And then, like, the next month, she moved to Index, which is an hour from me. And I was just like, no! I mean, I literally had one get-together with her kids and her, and then she moved. And so, devastated, I was like, you can't move away from me. She's like, well, come out and visit. It's beautiful out here. And her husband works at the whitewater rafting that was mentioned in those chapters, and he is a firefighter for this area. They're just an amazing couple, on fire for the Lord, and I love them. So even though it's only an hour, I tend to only get out there twice a year because she is crazy busy and she's always doing exciting, wonderful things for the Lord, for her community, for her kids, another homeschool mom. And so it usually only works out that every 6 months we get a chance to head out to Index. I really haven't had her except for birthday parties at my house because I love going to Index so much. So the kids and I just take an entire afternoon and we drive the hour out there. And it was while visiting out there, and she lives her backyard, like, she's got an area of grass, then some steps down, and then there's the Skykomish River. And it is beautiful. And it is rushing, dangerous, beautiful in the early summer, right after all the rains. And then it is dry, trickle, peaceful in the fall when we've had our dry summer. And I've been there both times of the year and just seen the beauty of it. And there are mountains. She's got a cliff face and mountains right in front of her house. And I've taken tons of pictures, but my camera's terrible. I keep hoping that my photographer sister can someday go out there with me and take pictures. But we would sit out by that river and in her house and just talk the Lord. And I was just like, I want to capture this. But I got to thinking about, Vivian being, typical American typical American girl, teenage girl, high school girl, who's not grateful for what she's got, who's got, tough life, and what it'd be like to be stuck out here and not understand how beautiful it is, and to use that in my writing. And I really like, even with contemporary or speculative, to sometimes use real life places as a way to kind of ground my book and help me I like doing research. So I took gazillions of pictures. I went into the general store and met the manager. I walked the entire town. It is that small with my friend. And I went to the grocery store that Ash and Vivian go to in the book and talked to the checkout lady. I threw bottles off of a shelf in the grocery store. Those of you who've seen the meme go past about Vivian knocking bottles off and Ash calling her sexy, I went into the grocery store and threw bottles off to see what would happen and what kind of sound it would make. I just got to sit in Index and soak it up and then throw it into my book. So that was really special. And it now holds a really special place in my heart. And the 199 people in Index will know what I'm talking about. I feel like it's kind of like a Forks, Washington. Twilight was set in Forks, and it's this tiny town because she was looking for rainforesty and wet all year, and then Forks became huge and famous. So maybe someday I can put Index on a bigger map, I don't know. Well, I am losing my voice, so if there are any other comments or questions, maybe we'll have to wait for next time. But if you guys enjoyed Brad doing my male voices, maybe I'll have to do this more often.
Yep.
Thank you so much, my dear.
Pay me more next time.
Pay him more?
Yes.
More smooches? He doesn't want any smooches now. I'm sick. All right, thank you so much, guys.
All right, glad to know there are more alert readers out there.